This section looks at Africa's trends and prospects. We begin by looking at the trends with regard to demographics. If you take a look at the map here of the continent, you will see that by 2050, that the countries that are shown in the various colors will have the youngest populations in the world. The escalating birth rates and higher life expectancy are rapidly increasing the population of Africa, where, according to the UNICEF Generation 2030 Africa report, the current 1 billion plus populace is expected to double within the next 15 years, and its under 18 population to increase by 2/3 to almost 1 billion. Unless governments act quickly and collaborate with private and education sectors alike, the growing population is going to significantly intensify existing challenges on creating opportunities for youth unemployment in each of the markets and countries shown here. Related to unemployment levels, larger populations will also live longer and continue to challenge the social services and other things. The rise of the individual. While we have talked before about one of the main philosophies in many African cultures is the idea of the community, the Akan proverb, I am because we are. We know that also because of advances in global education, health, and technology, they've helped to empower individuals as never before, leading to increased demands for transparency and participation in government and public decision making. These changes will continue and are ushering in a new era in human history in which by 2022, more people will be middle class than poor. When we discuss the technological trends and prospects in Africa, there are many things that are happening on the continent. One I'd like to talk about is M-Pesa. M stands for mobile, and Pesa is Swahili for money. And it's a branchless banking service that began in Kenya and allows individuals to use their smartphones to make all kinds of financial transactions, transferring money, and makes opportunities for these kinds of things in areas where, as we mentioned, branchless banking, there are no banks, and it completely sidesteps the need for banks in the areas where it's popular, and has become so successful that it's attracted the interest of PayPal, which is now partnering with M-Pesa in Kenya, but it's also spread to some other African countries and even some areas in India. Another technological development is that in Rwanda, the first smartphones built entirely on the continent, the Mara X and the Mara Z, are now available and have been for some time. Space science. A lot of people, when they think about Africa, certainly don't think about space in terms of the way in which we know that for years we've looked at the space race back in the 50s and 60s between the United States and the former Soviet Union. We know many other countries since then have become involved. But in 2016, the African Union adopted an African space policy and strategy. And there's several points to make about that. Number one, although Africa is seen as a newcomer in the space race, several African cultures made major contributions to our understanding of astronomy. The Egyptians studied the movement of the sun and created a system of constellations that predates that of ancient Greece. The Dogon people of Mali also amassed a rich store of astronomical observations and knew the existence of Saturn's rings, Jupiter's moons, and more. Number 2, Africa has a real geographic advantage in astronomy and other space sciences. The total absence of light populations in countries such as Tanzania make it incredibly easy to watch the night sky. Furthermore, Kenya's geographic position on the equator makes it an excellent location to launch satellites into the geostationary and other orbits. Number 3, in the last decade, South Africa has emerged as one of the leading forces in space science in sub-Saharan Africa. It has harnessed Earth observation satellite to do human satellite mapping. What's more, the country will co-host the Square Kilometer Array, an international effort to build the world's largest telescope. 4. Nigeria is also leading the charge. Its space agency, the National Space Research and Development Agency, flies several multi-million-dollar satellites. Last month, the country also announced it has plans to launch an astronaut into space by 2030. 5. Space-related applications and technology can help drive sustainable development on the continent. As the AU African Union Space Strategy emphasizes, satellites make it possible to monitor environmental change caused by human activity and natural processes. 6. Space is an inspirational topic and has an incredible power to spur widespread interest in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics and STEM among students. When we look at areas such as health, instant education, and agricultural education and equality, there continue to be both challenges and opportunities on the continent. We look at the things that continue to multiply there. The future holds some exciting ways in which these areas can continue to experience significant growth. Economic interconnectedness. The interconnected global economy will see an continued increase in the levels of international trade and capital flows. But unless international conventions can be strengthened, progress and optimum economic benefits may not be realized. We will talk more and see more about the interconnectedness from an economic perspective on the continent of Africa in a future session. Public debt. Public debt is expected to operate as a significant constraint on fiscal and policy options through to the year 2030 and beyond. Governments' ability to bring debt under control and find new ways of delivering public services will affect their capacity to respond to major social, economic, and environmental challenges. We look at economic power shifts now. Emerging economies are lifting millions out of poverty while also exerting more influence in the global economy. With a rebalancing of global power, international institutions and national governments will need a greater focus on maintaining their transparency and inclusiveness. Climate change. The rising greenhouse gas emissions are causing climate change and driving a complex mix of unpredictable changes to an environment while further taxing the resilience of natural and built systems. Achieving the right combination of adaptation and mitigation policies will be difficult for most governments. Resource stress. The combined pressures of population growth, economic growth, and climate change will place increased stress on the essential natural resources, including water, good arable land, and energy. These issues will place sustainable resource management at the center of government agendas. And finally, urbanization. By 2030, more than 50% of the population of Africa will be living in cities, and over 60% will be living in cities by 2050. Urbanization is creating significant opportunities for social and economic development and more sustainable living, but it's also putting pressure on infrastructure and resources, particularly energy. It will be interesting to see where these things, in terms of the trends and prospects, and these are just a few of them when it comes to Africa, what the future holds.